Daniel was standing there in his wrinkled tuxedo, his boutonniere hanging sideways, swearing on his mother's grave that what I saw wasn't real. His voice was shaking, his hands were trembling, and he kept saying, "Baby, it's not what it looks like. I can explain everything." But when the hotel security manager pressed play on that surveillance footage, Daniel went completely silent. His face turned white as his wedding shirt, and then he just collapsed into the chair like his entire world had crumbled. Which, to be fair, it had. But let me back up, because this story doesn't start on my wedding night. It starts 3 years earlier, in the most ordinary way possible. I met Daniel at a coffee shop downtown. I was working 2 jobs back then, morning shifts at the hospital as a nurse's aide, and evenings at a small accounting firm doing data entry. Money was tight, but I was saving every penny I could for nursing school. I'd order the same thing every morning, black coffee and whatever day-old pastry was cheapest. Daniel was different from the guys I usually dated. He had this quiet confidence about him, wore nice clothes that looked expensive but not flashy. He was a project manager at a construction company, he said. Made decent money, owned his own place, drove a reliable car. Most importantly, he seemed to respect my ambitions. When I told him I was working toward becoming a registered nurse, he didn't roll his eyes or make jokes about bedpans. He said he admired my dedication. Those first 6 months were honestly perfect. He'd pick me up after my evening shifts, and we'd drive around the city talking about everything and nothing. He never pressured me to spend money I didn't have. When we went out, he paid without making a big deal about it. He seemed genuinely interested in my stories from the hospital, even the gross ones. But I started noticing things around month 7. Little things at first. Daniel would get text messages during dinner and immediately flip his phone face down. He'd take calls in the other room, speaking in hushed tones. When I asked who it was, he'd always have a reasonable explanation. Work emergency, his sick aunt, his buddy having relationship problems. The bigger red flag was how he handled money. Daniel always had cash, always picked up the check, always seemed comfortable spending. But when I suggested we start looking at apartments together after a year of dating, he got weird about it. He'd say things like, "Let's see how my next project goes," or, "I might have some changes coming up at work." I figured he was just being cautious, which honestly seemed responsible. What I didn't know then was that Daniel wasn't a project manager at a construction company. Daniel was married. I found out the worst possible way. We'd been together almost 2 years when I decided to surprise him at his office with lunch. I'd gotten off my hospital shift early and thought it would be sweet to show up with his favorite sandwich from that deli he always talked about. The construction company address he'd given me led to a small residential neighborhood. I drove around for 20 minutes looking for an office building that didn't exist. Finally, I called the company directly. The receptionist was confused. "Daniel Morrison? No, we don't have anyone by that name working here. Are you sure you have the right company?" My hands were shaking when I hung up. I sat in my car for an hour, trying to make sense of it. Maybe he'd changed jobs and forgot to tell me. Maybe I'd mixed up the company name. There had to be a logical explanation. That evening, I confronted him as gently as I could. "Hey, I tried to surprise you at work today, but I couldn't find the office. Did you guys move locations or something?" The look that crossed his face, I'd never seen anything like it. Pure panic, followed immediately by what I now recognize as practiced deception. He laughed it off, said they'd been doing most of their work on site lately, that the main office was basically just storage now. He was so smooth, so convincing. He even pulled up some construction photos on his phone to show me the project he was working on. I wanted to believe him. I loved him, and love makes you stupid sometimes. But the doubt was planted. Over the next few months, I started paying closer attention. Daniel was always available on weeknights, but never on weekends until after 6 p.m. He never invited me to company parties or work events. I never met his coworkers. His social media was practically non-existent. The final piece of the puzzle came from the most unexpected place. I was at the grocery store, running errands on a Saturday afternoon, when I saw him. Daniel, in the produce section, with a woman and 2 little kids. He was pushing the cart while she compared apples. The kids, a boy who looked maybe 8 and a girl around 5, were hanging off his arms, calling him daddy. The woman handed him her phone to take a picture of her with the kids. They looked like any normal family, doing their weekly shopping. I stood there frozen behind a display of bananas, watching the man I'd been planning to move in with live his real life. The life I wasn't part of. The life he'd been hiding from me for 2 years. I never confronted him directly. Instead, I did what any rational person in 2023 would do. I became a detective. It took me 3 weeks to piece together the full picture. Daniel Morrison, married for 12 years to Jennifer Morrison, father of 2, living in a suburban house about 30 minutes from the city. His real job was as a regional sales manager for a medical supply company. He traveled frequently, which explained how he had so much time to spend with me. The construction company's story, the downtown apartment, the flexible schedule, all lies. I was the other woman, and I hadn't even known it. When I finally confronted him with the evidence, he broke down completely. Tears, apologies, the whole performance. He told me his marriage had been dead for years, that he was planning to leave Jennifer anyway, that meeting me had just accelerated his timeline. He begged me to give him 6 months to handle the divorce properly so we could be together openly. I'm not proud of this, but I almost believed him. I love this man. I'd built a future around him in my head. The alternative, accepting that 2 years of my life had been a lie, was too painful to process immediately. But here's the thing about lies. Once you know someone is capable of maintaining one that big, that elaborate, for that long, you start questioning everything. Every sweet thing he'd ever said, every promise he'd made, every moment that had felt genuine, it all became suspect. I told him I needed time to think, and he gave me space. Too much space, actually. What I realize now is that he was probably relieved to have an excuse to pull back without having to maintain the charade. 3 months later, he called me out of the blue. His divorce was finalized, he said. He was ready to start fresh, to build a life we'd always talked about. He wanted to marry me. The proposal was everything I'd dreamed of in my naive moments. Dinner at the nicest restaurant in the city, a ring that probably cost more than I made in 6 months, a speech about how I was the love of his life and he couldn't imagine a future without me. I said yes, not because I trusted him completely, but because I wanted to believe that people could change, that love could overcome deception, that our connection was real, even if the circumstances had been false. The engagement period was actually wonderful. Daniel was attentive, transparent about his schedule, introduced me to his kids gradually. Jennifer, his ex-wife, was civil when I met her. The kids seemed to like me well enough. I started to think maybe we really could build something genuine out of the wreckage of those lies. We planned a small wedding. Nothing extravagant. I'm not that kind of person. And honestly, starting a marriage by spending $50,000 on one party seemed like bad financial planning. We booked a nice hotel ballroom, invited close family and friends, kept everything elegant but simple. The night before the wedding, I was staying at the hotel with my maid of honor, Sarah, while Daniel stayed at his place with his best man. Traditional, separate bachelor and bachelorette parties weren't really our style, but we figured one night apart before committing to forever was reasonable. Sarah and I ordered room service, painted our nails, and watched romantic comedies until way too late. I remember feeling genuinely happy for the first time in months. Nervous, sure, but excited. Ready to start this new chapter. The wedding itself was perfect. Daniel looked handsome in his tuxedo. I felt beautiful in my dress. And the ceremony was exactly what I'd envisioned. His kids walked me down the aisle, a sweet touch that made everyone tear up. The vows we wrote ourselves were honest and hopeful. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, I actually believed we were going to make it. The reception was lovely too. Good food, decent band, everyone seemed to be having fun. Daniel and I danced to At Last by Etta James, and for those 4 minutes, everything felt right with the world. But here's where the story takes its turn. Around 10 p.m., the reception was winding down. Most of the older guests had already left, and it was mainly just the wedding party and younger family members still hanging around. Daniel and I were making our rounds, saying goodbye to people, when his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression changed immediately. "I'll be right back," he told me, and headed toward the lobby. Sarah noticed too. "Where's he going?" "Phone call, I guess. Probably work." But something felt off. It was 10 p.m. on a Saturday. What kind of work emergency couldn't wait until Monday? 15 minutes passed. Then 20. I started to worry that something serious had happened. Maybe a family emergency, maybe something with the kids. I walked out to the lobby to check on him. The lobby was mostly empty except for the front desk staff and a few guests checking in. No Daniel. I asked the concierge if he'd seen a man in a tuxedo, and he pointed toward the elevators. Went up about 10 minutes ago. That's when the real panic set in. We were staying in the bridal suite on the 7th floor, but Daniel didn't have a key. I had both key cards in my purse. So where was he going, and how did he get there? I took the elevator up, checking each floor for any sign of him. Nothing on the 2nd floor, nothing on the 3rd. But on the 4th floor, as the elevator doors opened, I heard voices from down the hallway. One of them was definitely Daniel's. I followed the sound to room 412. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear Daniel talking to someone in hushed, urgent tones. A woman's voice responded, equally quiet. My heart was pounding, so hard I was sure they'd hear it. I crept closer to the door, trying to make out what they were saying. Can't keep doing this, the woman was saying. It's not fair to her. I know. But what am I supposed to do? It's done now. We're married. Daniel, this is insane. You married her 3 hours ago. 3 hours. That's when I pushed the door open. Daniel was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in his tuxedo, but with his jacket off and his tie loosened. Standing by the window was Jennifer, his ex-wife, the woman who was supposed to be ancient history. They both turned to look at me, and the expression on Daniel's face was exactly what you'd expect. Pure, undiluted terror. Jennifer just looked sad. It's not what it looks like, Daniel said immediately, standing up. Baby, I can explain. But I was already backing out of the room. This was too much. Too familiar. The same words he'd used when I'd caught him in lies before. The same pleading tone. The same assumption that I would just accept whatever explanation he manufactured. I ran back to the elevator, Daniel right behind me. Please, just let me explain. Jennifer called, and she was upset about something with the kids. And she was staying in the hotel anyway for the wedding, so I thought. You thought what? I hit the elevator button repeatedly, as if that would make it come faster. You thought it was normal to disappear from your own wedding reception to comfort your ex-wife in her hotel room? She's the mother of my children. What she needed was to call literally anyone else in the world except my brand new husband. The elevator doors opened and I got in. Daniel tried to follow me, but I held up my hand. Don't. Just don't. I went straight to the bridal suite, locked the door, and called Sarah. She was still at the reception, wondering where we'd gone. Get up here now, I told her, and bring whoever's still down there. I need witnesses for whatever's about to happen. 20 minutes later, my hotel room was full of people in formal wear, all looking confused and concerned. Daniel was knocking on the door, asking to be let in, promising he could explain everything. Sarah looked at me. Do you want to hear what he has to say? I thought about it. Part of me did want to hear his explanation. Part of me was hoping there was some innocent reason for what I'd seen. But the bigger part of me, the part that had been through this exact cycle before, knew better. He can explain through the door, I said loudly enough for him to hear. So there we were, Daniel in the hallway, me and 6 wedding guests in bathrobes and rumpled formal wear, conducting marriage counseling through a hotel room door at midnight. Daniel's explanation was exactly what you'd expect. Jennifer had been emotional about the kids adjusting to the divorce, and she'd asked him to talk privately. They'd gone to her room, because it was quieter than the lobby. Nothing inappropriate had happened. He understood how it looked, but he was just trying to be a good co-parent. It was reasonable. It was plausible. It was exactly the kind of thing that would explain away what I'd seen. But I didn't believe him. Daniel, I said through the door, if that's really all it was, then you won't mind if we go ask Jennifer to confirm your story. Silence. Daniel. She left. She was embarrassed about the whole thing and went home. Of course she had. Sarah squeezed my hand. What do you want to do? What I wanted to do was crawl into bed and pretend this entire day had been a nightmare. What I actually did was make the smartest decision of my life. I want to see the security footage. The hotel manager was not thrilled about being woken up at 12:30 a.m. to review surveillance tapes, but when you explain that you need to verify whether your husband of 4 hours has been cheating on you, people tend to make exceptions. We all trooped down to the security office, me in my wedding dress, Sarah and the others still in their formal wear, and Daniel trailing behind us looking like a man walking to his execution. The security manager, a middle-aged woman named Carol who'd probably seen everything in her career, pulled up the footage from the fourth-floor hallway. "What time frame are we looking at?" "Starting around 10 p.m., I said. Carol fast-forwarded through the footage until we saw Daniel step off the elevator at 10:07 p.m. He walked directly to room 412 and knocked. Jennifer opened the door immediately, like she'd been waiting for him. They disappeared into the room. "Keep watching," I said. We watched the empty hallway for several minutes. Then, at 10:43 p.m., we saw me get off the elevator and walk toward the room. A few minutes later, we saw me running back toward the elevator, followed by Daniel. "Anything else you need to see?" Carol asked. "Can you show us when she arrived?" Carol rewound the footage. At 9:23 p.m., we watched Jennifer get off the elevator and let herself into room 412 with a key card. "Wait," Sarah said. "Rewind that again." We watched it again. Jennifer definitely had her own key. "Carol," I said, "can you tell us when that room was booked?" Carol pulled up the reservation system. "Room 412 was booked, let's see, 3 weeks ago. 2-night stay, Friday and Saturday. Reserved under Morrison, Jennifer." The room went quiet. You could hear the air conditioning humming. 3 weeks ago," I said slowly. "Daniel, we booked our wedding venue 4 weeks ago. We sent out invitations 5 weeks ago." Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. "She didn't just happen to be staying in the same hotel as our wedding. You told her to book a room here. You planned this. It's not what you think." "Stop saying that." I turned to Carol. "Is there any way to see what happened inside the room?" "We don't have cameras inside guest rooms, ma'am. Privacy laws, but we'd already seen enough." Sarah was the one who put it together first. "They're not divorced, are they?" Daniel's face went completely white. "Oh my God," I whispered. "You're still married to her." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. Finally, Daniel spoke, and his voice was barely audible. "The divorce isn't final yet. There were some complications with the paperwork, and—" I didn't hear the rest. I was too busy processing the fact that I wasn't actually married, that the entire day had been a performance, that I'd been living in a fantasy for months, planning a wedding that couldn't legally exist. Sarah grabbed my arm. "We need to call a lawyer. Right now." But I wasn't thinking about lawyers. I was thinking about how stupid I felt, how thoroughly I'd been played, how everyone at the reception, my family, my friends, my coworkers, had witnessed what they thought was my fairy tale wedding, when really it was just the most elaborate lie Daniel had ever told. The hotel manager offered to comp our room for the night, which was generous but not particularly helpful. I spent the rest of the evening in that bridal suite, still in my wedding dress, while Sarah fielded phone calls from confused family members who'd heard rumors that something had gone wrong. Daniel tried calling and texting dozens of times. I turned off my phone. By Sunday morning, the full scope of the disaster was clear. Not only was I not legally married, but Daniel had committed bigamy, a felony in our state. The wedding vendor contracts were all in both our names, meaning I was financially responsible for half the costs of a fake wedding. And everyone I knew was waiting for an explanation that I didn't know how to give. I spent the next week in damage control mode, calling vendors to explain the situation without going into the criminal details, fielding awkward questions from relatives, returning wedding gifts with apologetic notes, figuring out what to do with a wedding dress I'd worn to a fake ceremony. The hardest part was dealing with Daniel's kids. They'd been so excited about having a new stepmom, and now they were confused about why I'd suddenly disappeared from their lives. I couldn't explain the truth without destroying their relationship with their father, so I just had to let them think I'd abandoned them. Daniel's attempts to contact me escalated from apologetic to desperate to angry. He left voicemails explaining that the divorce really was almost final, that we could have a real wedding as soon as the paperwork was complete, that Jennifer meant nothing to him and never had. The voicemail that finally made me block his number was the one where he said, "You're overreacting. Lots of people have complicated divorces. This doesn't change how I feel about you." Overreacting. To discovering that my wedding was fraudulent and my husband was a bigamist. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but Daniel's story kept unraveling. Over the next month, I learned that Jennifer hadn't known about me until the week before the wedding. She'd hired a private investigator to look into Daniel's finances during their divorce proceedings, and the investigator had uncovered his second life. The hotel room wasn't Jennifer confronting Daniel about the affair, it was Jennifer confronting Daniel about the bigamy. She was just as much a victim as I was, really. Her marriage had been a lie for years, and she'd only found out because she was trying to protect herself financially in the divorce. The divorce that, it turned out, Daniel had never actually filed for. There was no complicated paperwork. There were no delays. Daniel had been lying about the divorce from the beginning, just like he'd lied about everything else. Jennifer and I actually ended up talking a few times during the legal proceedings. She was decent about the whole thing, as decent as you can be when you're dealing with the woman your husband fake married while still legally married to you. She confirmed what I'd suspected. Daniel was a compulsive liar who'd been living multiple lives for years. The bigamy charges were eventually dropped in exchange for Daniel pleading guilty to fraud. He got probation and community service, and had to pay restitution for the wedding expenses. I never saw him again after that night in the hotel. The whole experience changed me, obviously. Not in some dramatic, life-altering way, but in smaller, more fundamental ways. I became more careful about trusting people, more aware of red flags, more willing to ask difficult questions and demand honest answers. I also became more appreciative of boring, predictable relationships. The guy I'm with now, he's nothing like Daniel. He's straightforward, maybe even a little dull. He does what he says he's going to do. When he tells me he's at work, I know he's actually at work. When he says he loves me, I believe him. It's not the passionate, all-consuming love story I thought I wanted. It's better. It's real. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the whole experience, and honestly, I don't. Not anymore. Because that night in the hotel, when I made the decision to demand the truth instead of accepting another lie, was the moment I stopped being the kind of person who could be fooled by someone like Daniel. I learned that love without honesty isn't love at all. It's just a really elaborate fantasy. And I'd rather live in reality, even when it's disappointing, than in a beautiful lie. The security footage didn't just show me what Daniel was doing in that hotel room. It showed me who I really was, someone strong enough to demand the truth, even when the truth destroyed everything I thought I wanted. And that was worth more than any marriage built on lies could ever be. If you enjoyed this story of finding strength in betrayal, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Share your own stories of finding the truth when everything seemed perfect in the comments below. I read every single one. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.